evening, just about every man aged 18 to 50 left the kibbutz to go fight that terrible war. Not all of them returned. That's part of why I'm here. Later, I went to the Technion to study engineering, and on June 5th of 1982, I was preparing for the finals of my second year in the Technion, and my battalion was called for reserve duty for what's called the First Lebanon War. In a day, a whole slew, 300 civilians became an artillery battalion, and we were in Lebanon. Never mind that turned out to be a phony war, and I'm not going to get into it. But I guess what I learned from that is when we're called to defend our country, we go. And later we ask some questions as well, but we go. And as I think you are going to hear from our guest today, and that's how I feel, we've been called to save the democracy of Israel. Unfortunately, this time, I'm going to say the enemy is inside, it's not outside. So I was then recruited to come work at Microsoft, and I moved here with my wife, Hemda, and since then we've had our 3 kids here, and we've lived here for quite a while. And as Ayelet said, I'm part of a venture capital firm, and have helped Israeli companies raise a lot of money from US investors, and that's kind of my contribution from afar. I've been asked in 5 minutes to give all of you an overview of what the hell has happened in Israel for the last 9 years, so bear with me. So the last election was held in Israel in November. I'm not going to speak that fast the whole time. In November of last year, it followed 3 years in which Israel had 5 elections. The reason for that was that Netanyahu in 2020 was indicted on 3 charges, and many of his previous allies refused to form a coalition with him. So Israel had this time of instability and one election after another. As a result, Netanyahu, who just wanted to cling to power, went after more and more extreme coalition partners, which brought us to where we are here. He and his coalition barely won the election last year. The government was sworn in December, and within less than a week announced that they are going to enact a judicial reform. This took all of Israel by surprise. Neither Bibi or his party or any of the other coalition party had mentioned in the run-up to the election anything about judicial reform. It was a red flag for many Israelis. And the one good thing coming out of that is the formation of the resistance movement in Israel, and we're fortunate to have some of its leaders here with us today to share their story. From that time on, consistently more than 60% of Israelis oppose this, what they call judicial reform, and I'm going to just use judicial coup, and including a good majority, at least a quarter of Netanyahu's Likud party voters, if not more. And in March, they started to move forward. They announced that they're going to move forward with passing these laws. And the protests that had already been going on since January. So the protest has been going on now for 33 weeks. If you equate the population of Israel to the population of the US, on average, every week there would have been 14 million people protesting in the US. That's how substantial this protest is. There are definitely some people who are calling this the largest protest movement ever, both in terms of the number of people, the percent of the population, and how long it continues, and we're not done. So on March, they basically were about to vote to pass these laws, and many members of the reserve forces and many members of brother and sister in arms who are here announced that if the laws are passed, they will stop volunteering for reserve duty. And you have to understand that the Israeli military is built with a nucleus of regular army and then a larger reserve duty, especially in the Air Force and some special forces. In the Air Force, a large number of the pilots are veterans, like we have Micha here, who keep flying, and they have to basically, they're volunteering and they have to fly twice a month to stay ready for active duty. So a bunch of them said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to continue to volunteer if you pass these laws. And the defense minister, Gallant, one of Bibi's cronies, had a bit of sense, and he basically said, I'm not going to vote. I'm worried that this is going to be such a damage to Israel security that I'm not going to vote for these. What did Bibi do? Bibi announced that he's firing his security minister. As a result, the biggest demonstration came out spontaneously that same night, just under 1 million people, out of a population of 10 million people, took to the streets of Israel, and Bibi unfired his defense minister and announced that he's going to put a pause to all of this. So it was a temporary and an important win for the protest movement, but it was short-lived. And and the demonstrations continued, and as some of the people indeed said that they're not going to serve, Bibi, who's been a very divisive leader in Israel for a long time, has been calling the demonstration, which is really the kind of the core of who Israel is, traitors and anarchists and leftists and elitists and a lot worse. So we have to remember that Israel democracy is very fragile. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but there's no separation of power between the legislative, the Knesset, and the executive. And there's no constitution. Really, the kind of the checks and balances on what the government can do and is doing is pretty much the independence of the Supreme Court and the Attorney General to oversee egregious action by the government. And that is what, fast forward to July, this government passed the law that basically doesn't allow them to use what's called reasonableness, which means they can't strike down laws or action of the government which are inappropriate, illegal, anti-democratic, corrupt, and many other adjectives that I don't remember right now. And it basically took the power away from what the judicial branch can do and keep back the power of the legislative, of the executive. We're going to skip a bunch of stuff here. So where we stand now, so that law was passed on July 24th. There is a number of petitions before the Supreme Court to overturn that law. That debate will start on September 12th. There's a lot of hope that the court will take some action to overturn either partially or completely that law, but we don't know. It is very clear that the Supreme Court will be influenced by public opinion in Israel and what the protest movement is doing and lots of other things. And we need to be ready, because even if they overturn it, Netanyahu has already basically said that he's not going to comply with what the Supreme Court decides. So Israel is going to be in serious chaos, and it's not clear who the security forces will go after in that case. That's where having a very, very strong and united protest and movement around is so important. If the government succeeds in this, I think as Rabbi Wiener said that very, very nicely, Israel will cease to be a democracy. In fact, it is even possible that Israel will never have a free and a fair election again. That's quite possible, because if the Supreme Court is neuter, the politicians with a simple majority can decide like who can run for election, who cannot run for election. We know that women's rights and LGBTQ rights will be trampled. One member of the government said that gay people are a bigger threat to Israel than Hezbollah or Hamas. So you know what they think. We know, and forget about the rights of the Israeli Arabs and Palestinians. Don't even mention that. And the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox are overreaching and imposing their view of religion, what Judaism means, on more and more parts of the society. And in return for their support of dismantling the judicial, Bibi is allowing that to happen. So, you know, women praying in the Kotel, no more. Reform and conservative Jews, who are the majority of American Jews, are treated with suspicion and are not particularly welcome. We're seeing separation of men and women on beaches, on buses, in the educational environment already taking place right now. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times today just about that. And on top of that, a secondary effect of this will be a huge brain drain from Israel that will, over time, harm Israel's economy and civil society gravely. The Israel that we feel, that we all feel connected to, if this government will continue what it's doing without being stopped, Israel will become a pariah state. It's going to be more and more difficult for the US to continue to support Israel the way it supports it today. In fact, it'll be more and more difficult for all of us to support such an Israel. So that's how grave the danger is. The one force that can stop that, or the one force that can lead to stopping that, is the protest movement in Israel, and at its core is brothers and sisters in arms, who we're very lucky to have some of its members here with us today. So, I think I've said enough. I would like, before we hear from the people from Brother and Sister in Arms, I would like to invite our first guest. I would like to invite Professor Karen Avraham, the Dean of Medicine at Tel Aviv University, who will share with us the impact of what's going on in Israel on the education and medical system in Israel.